What's up, everyone? All right, in today's episode, we're going to break down the price action on two of our biggest gainers in the market today. We had EHGO squeezing up 250%, and we had NXTS squeezing up 350%. Two big moves. That's a great way to start the week. You know, we had the long weekend. I wasn't sure what momentum would be like this morning. Thursday, decent. Wednesday, not so great. So we kind of finished the week a little slow. Now coming into the new week, I wanted to give stocks this morning the opportunity to prove themselves before jumping on anything. And when I first sat down this morning, I noticed that we already had a couple stocks that made big moves, but I didn't really like their position for taking a trade right at 7 a.m. Now, for those of you guys tuning in perhaps for the first time, I begin trading each morning at about 7 a.m. and I actually live stream while I'm trading to members at Warrior Trading. There'll be a link pinned to the top of the comments for a 2-week trial where you can watch over my shoulder as I'm trading. And you can also use the same software that you're seeing right here on the screen share during your trial. This is Day Trade Dash. This is the software I use for charting, scanning, breaking news, and it has our chat rooms and my live audio video broadcast. So in my recap or my watch list on Saturday for Monday morning, I had mentioned SAGT would be a stock to watch. It had squeezed up in after hours on Thursday and then closed at about 181. And I said it'd be worth watching for a continuation. However, I was concerned about the possibility that by 7 a.m. it will have already popped and pulled back. And that's exactly what happened. It popped at 4 a.m. and then pulled back. And so by 7 a.m., this thing, although it was still a leading gainer, because the gain is measured by the change from the prior day close. So it was still up 68% coming into 7 a.m., but it was, as soon as you looked at the chart, pretty clear that this was not something worth trading. It was below the 200 moving average, below the volume weighted average price, also below the 200 moving average on the daily, and it just wasn't set up for a good trade. So no trades on SAGT. We had Getty. This one was up about 128% this morning, squeezed up at 4 in the morning, all the way up to 250. Then it flushes. And coming into 7 a.m., it had already pulled back so much that it felt that to trade in this area would be trading the backside of this big move here. So no interest in Getty. Also, the float is a little bit higher on this one. So that was another factor. And the price is a little bit lower. Then we had TNON. This is a 60-cent stock. For me, it's too cheap. No interest in this one. So we had the high of about $1, dips down, pops up, dips down, pops up. It just isn't worth trading. So no interest there. Then we sort of had this interesting move where at about 7:05 a.m., we had ICCM pop up on the scanner. This stock you could see squeeze from about $6 up to $8, and some traders jumped in it very quickly. And I was a little bit surprised by that. And the reason I was surprised was because this is a stock that had made a big move just a couple days ago. And I felt that today's price action, this pop and then this little push higher, was really just a bounce off the low from the previous day. And I said, guys, if you just zoom out for a second, you'll see that we have this high back here of around $9.50. And although there's a little pivot here at 8, it needs to hold 8 and then up to 9 and then 950 before we're really in a good spot for a new move. So I said, I just don't think that's going to work. There's no news on it. I just don't think that that's going to work very well. Typically, that setup of a bounce off the low only gives a little pop, maybe 15, 20%. And then that's about it. Now, sometimes they're more than that, but usually I have low expectations. So for ICCM, I said, I don't think I'm interested in that. And then we had SkyQ that hit the scanner. And on SkyQ, I saw, this is, energy, fossil fuels. Let's see. So now I want to make sure I pronounce this the right way. Some people were giving me a hard time that I didn't pronounce the state that this is in the correct way. So some people said you got to really emphasize the E. Nivida. So there you go. For those of you guys giving me a hard time for saying Nevada, it's Nevada or Nevada. However you want to say it, it's a state that has the city of Las Vegas and also has some mining. And I thought energy fossil fuel, I just don't think this is the right sector. Granted, Energy USO, United States Oil Fund, has been up quite a bit. It's come down in the last couple weeks, so it's still relatively high, but I just don't think this is the right moment for that. I would say big picture, any company that's getting into domestic mining is kind of well behind the times. This is not, I mean, you know, the big companies have every ability to do this probably far better. So I had very low expectations of it. And the 200 moving average is about $4 a share. So it pops up from $1.20 up to $1.60, pulls back. It continues to push a little bit higher, ends up doing an inverted head and shoulders pattern and ripping up here, but I don't take any trades on it. I said, nah, I don't think so. But what was interesting is the moment this started to pop up, which was right here at about 7:30, you know who started to drop? ICCM. So ICCM drops right about here and just totally fails as attention shifted. So then attention was on SkyQ for a few minutes at least. And then after a few minutes of people trading SkyQ and realizing that energy is kind of a boring sector, attention suddenly shifted to CRMT. And CRMT rips up just as SkyQ starts dropping. And so this pops up at about, oh, no, sorry, this was the one in between. This must have been in between, or what was this? It doesn't matter. But what we were seeing was this shift, this jump from stock to stock to stock to stock. And so one would start squeezing, the other would drop. And so maybe this one started dropping when ICCM popped up, and then SkyQ started squeezing, and then ICCM dropped. Nonetheless, this was sort of the trend we were seeing of traders jumping from stock to stock. And I just thought, I don't think this is going to work super well. None of these are really holding their gains. I don't really trust them. So I'm sitting here, 7:30, no trades, 8 a.m., no trades, 8:15, still waiting. And then all of a sudden at about 8:22, we have NXTS that hits the scanner. When NXTS first hits the scanner, I had my chart zoomed out already because we had been talking about how important it is to check the previous couple days. And so immediately I was reminded of the fact that NXTS was the stock that squeezed up to 945 and then immediately dropped $2 a share. And this was on Wednesday of last week. Immediate rejection. It was terrible. There was no way you could have lost less than $2 a share on that. Then on the previous day, Tuesday, had gone from 12 and come all the way back down. Now in this day, some traders jumped in it just seeing this little window, not seeing anything else, and they saw basically a sub 1 million share float stock popping up, and typically that's bullish. So you see that, you get excited before it turns into a topping tail, and yet zooming out, you see the bigger picture. On the daily chart, however, this daily chart doesn't really show that price action because these candles are based on 9:30 to 4 p.m. price action. They don't show pre-market gains or losses. So the pre-market action was sort of disguised there. And I think that's maybe part of why people jumped in it on this day. They didn't know that it had done this the previous day. And then this morning, it happened again. But this morning, something was different. This ended up going up over 350%. Whereas on the previous days, it did a round trip and even closed the day red after going up 100%. So what was the difference? Well, if we look at the stock and we check the news, yes, we see that there was news this morning at 8:22 a.m. But there was also news on Wednesday at 7:32 a.m. MitoCare successfully completes broad analysis of SLC transport proteins, to accelerate novel SLC small molecule discovery. Similar sounding headlines. If you're not an expert in this company, what they do, or you're not into biotech space, these both seem similar. And yet one does a round trip and one goes higher. Now, this one did mention AI, AI drug discovery. That's a keyword. But I don't think that keyword alone is what makes the difference. I think what makes the difference is that today, there was nothing else that was competing for attention. There was nothing else that was interesting. Getty had dropped, EHGO had pulled back, TNON had pulled back. So these stocks, which were interesting earlier in the session at 4 a.m., were out of play. And, traders were just sitting and waiting for something. And so suddenly NXTS hits the scanner, ding, ding, ding. It's got news. It's still got that sub 1 million share float. And this time traders say, you know what? I'll give it a chance. Now, again, I think the issue the other 2 days was that it was competing with other stocks for the same attention. But today, without any competition, the first pullbacks got bought up. Dip, 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 dip. Pulls back here below VWAP, pops back up. Period of consolidation. And I said, after breaking the ice with my first trade in this area and only making about $1,000, I said, let's look at the daily chart for a second. And so I said, we'll just pop out on the daily chart and look at these levels. The high from Wednesday was $9.45. Let's mark that line. The midpoint kind of pivot here from Tuesday was 10.76, and the high was $12. So if we break over these levels, 9.45, we've got room to 10.76. 10.76, room to 12. We break over 12, what's the next level? Well, it's the 200 moving average, of course. And there it is, the 200 moving average. We actually went right to it. I wouldn't have expected we'd get that big of a move. Yes, this is a recent reverse split, but we had the 2 previous days last week where either of those days it could have made a big move, but it didn't. If I had known, I would have just held all the shares I bought down at 7 and not sold them till the exact high a day. But the reality is you never know how high these are going to go. And so you get in, you set your stop, you take your profit, the trade's done, now you look for another trade. And so I ended up taking probably a dozen or so trades on this, getting in, getting out, getting in, getting out. And at first, it wasn't particularly easy to trade. We had this resistance at about 929, which was just under that 945 level from the previous day. And then we were able to break that level. So if we look right here, we go under VWAP, then we squeeze up right here, and that pullback was the spot. So right there, that was where I added my biggest position of the day and got a clean move from about 975 to 1075 all the way up to $11 a share. And so right through that move, I was able to book some profit. And I'll show you where I'm sitting at the day. I got to log into my account. I logged out a few minutes ago, but I'll log back in. So I had my 2 accounts at Lightspeed, as I always do. One is a margin account, which I don't typically trade in because all of the gains would be taxable. I'll use that account sometimes for demonstrating short selling for our classes, but I don't trade in that account on a daily basis. I trade in my retirement account, and I've got a total profit of $15,687.94. But my last trade on NXTS was a little bit of a close call. I bought 9,000 shares at 1144, and that was right up in this area, right in here. And I thought this thing was going to squeeze. And when it rejected, I was able to unwind the position, getting out at 1154, 1143. Sarah, I'll show this better for you. Getting out, so I got in right there and then got out right through here. And I took a small loss on it, but it was tolerable. It wasn't a big loss. Maybe it might have even been a tiny profit, but I think it was a small loss. In any case, it was a close call because within a minute, it was down 50 cents a share and it sold off more. And so my thought that it was going to pull away right here was wrong timing, right idea. Because then at the open, it squeezes to 13, exactly what I wanted, halts up, pulls back, halts up a second time, pulls back, goes all the way up to 19, then a sharp pullback. Typically, I do a dip and rip after the first halt, going into the second, take some profit, and then maybe a dip and rip going into a potential third, but keeping a tight leash on it. It ends up dropping back down. We're right underneath the 200. We then come back up, we break through the 200, and we push higher. And all of this happened without me. I didn't take any trades on it. I just participated in the front side of the move, the very beginning of the move. And you could argue this is still the front side of the move. I try to be careful not to overtrade the backside. And I thought after this period of sideways price action that maybe this was going to roll over at the open, but it ended up having more in it. Nonetheless, while I left money on the table, I walked away with more profit in my pocket than I had at the beginning of the day. And I would say that's always a good day. And I reminded members in the chat room this morning that if you didn't fully capitalize on this move, as I did not, rather than chasing a stock that's getting more and more extended, the better thing to do is to print out this chart and mark it up. Mark it up. Mark up the places where you should have gotten in, the places where your risk would have been tight and your reward was bigger than whatever you were taking for risk, and where the indicators were positive, you had nice volume profile, your MACD was positive, so on and so forth, and use that to help you on the next trade. Because there's no question that we've been seeing stocks move like this almost every day for the last few weeks, and there's a really good chance we'll see more 200% moves this week. So regardless of how well you did on NXTS, if you made a lot on it or you lost money on it, you can learn from this chart, print it out, mark it up, and use that knowledge to help you trade the next one a little bit better. That's the best thing you can do. Now, of course, tuning into the chat room and listening to my commentary is helpful as well. You get to benefit from all my years of educated intuition. But even I, at times, will be a little too conservative and not fully capitalize on the move. Now, EHGO is interesting because you had this big pop at about 4:30 in the morning. It sells off. Seems like it's totally dead. Then at the open, it starts to rally. And I think in part, it was sympathy to NXTS. NXTS made a great move, but was too expensive for a lot of small account traders, including me. At a certain point with my small account, I couldn't trade it. I mean, I could, but it was just too expensive. And so this one started to get a little more attention, and you got a nice squeeze there. But ultimately, when it was just on sympathy and momentum, when the underlying stock making the big move started to pull back a little bit more, this was kind of over. So in any case, a couple of great moves today. This is a great start to the week, and I will be streaming, as always, tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. So if you haven't already checked out that 2-week trial, link is pinned to the top of the comments and in the description. And check out the Small Account Challenge series. Today was day 7, and that account is now up 300% in 3 days. Not bad. But as always, my results aren't typical, and trading is risky. So you can best manage your risk by practicing in the simulator before you ever put real money on the line. And with that, I'll see you guys tomorrow morning, bright and early at 7 a.m.